They weren't the most talented team, they didn't have the flashiest offense, the biggest stars, or the league support, but for nearly 3 years, no one could stop them. They knocked out Bird, humbled Magic, and turned Michael Jordan's rise into a war of attrition. This wasn't basketball as you know it, this was violence, strategy, and psychological warfare disguised as team defense.
You ever see this? Chuck Daly wants a piece of Stan Olbeck, and now Vinnie Johnson.
So how did a gritty, hated team from Detroit beat the game's greatest legends and nearly break the league in the process? To understand why the Bad Boy Pistons were so impossible to beat, you have to go back to Detroit in the early 1980s. That story starts in a city that had nothing left to lose.
Detroit's filing for Chapter 9 bankruptcy to bring the city out of billions of dollars in debt.
The city was reeling. The auto industry was collapsing, unemployment was surging, and Detroit's national reputation was in the gutter. The Pistons? No different. They were a joke, barely filling seats, losing constantly, and completely irrelevant in a league dominated by flashy offenses and polished superstars. Back then, nobody wanted to play for the Pistons, and nobody wanted to live in Detroit. The franchise was a graveyard for careers, but in the 1981 draft, there was a spark. The Pistons held the second overall pick, and they had their eyes locked on a rising star out of Indiana, Isiah Thomas, a 6'1" dynamo who had just led the Hoosiers to a national title under the legendary Bobby Knight.
Isiah Thomas breaking down the floor, off the Kitchell, inside, lays it up and in.
The media and the press and the fans got to see what kind of player he was. I saw him every day in practice since the beginning of school and saw those amazing things day in and day out.
He just looked different, because of his size, but he had so much in that little package that you would never imagine what he could do on a basketball court.
Isiah had the game, he had the fire, but there was one problem. He didn't want Detroit. He wanted to go home to Chicago and play for the Bulls. So he tried to sabotage the process. He tanked his pre-draft interview with Detroit, answering questions with sarcasm, trying to come off as immature, hoping they'd pass on him.
The first thing was you.
Pistons GM Jack McCloskey, better known as Trader Jack, wasn't fooled. He listened, watched, and finally leaned in and said, "I know exactly what you're doing."
And Jack McCloskey was asking me all these questions, and I was intentionally answering every one of them wrong. And finally, at the end, he looked at me, goes, "I know what you're doing." He said, "But I'm going to draft you at number 2 if you're there. And you're going to love it here."
Under the leadership of general manager Jack McCloskey, Detroit started building something radical. Not a collection of superstars, but a gang of enforcers, underdogs, and specialists who would do whatever it took to win. They drafted and traded for players like Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn, Dennis Rodman, and Joe Dumars. None of them looked like future legends. Laimbeer was awkward and unathletic. Rodman was raw and quiet. Dumars was overlooked and undersized, but together, they had one thing in common. They didn't care how basketball was supposed to be played. And that's where the story turns. Most teams built around finesse, Detroit built around violence. Most teams avoided contact, Detroit welcomed it. By the mid-'80s, the Pistons weren't just winning, they were punishing, and the league didn't know how to handle it. The Celtics, the Lakers, even Jordan's Bulls, they all ran into the same wall. A team that refused to play by the script. But this wasn't just street ball. Chuck Daly, their head coach, was a mastermind. He didn't try to change his players, he amplified them. Daly created a system that turned chaos into chemistry. He gave Rodman the freedom to crash every board. He gave Laimbeer the green light to set bone-crushing screens and shoot threes. He let Isiah run the offense like a mob boss, calculated, ruthless, and unpredictable. The media hated them, the league fined them, opponents called them thugs, but the Pistons didn't care. Because underneath the elbows, ejections, and trash talk was something even more dangerous. They knew exactly what they were doing. And once the Pistons bought into that identity fully, that's when the terror really started. Because what came next wasn't just about hard fouls or bruised ribs, it was a complete system designed to mentally and physically break their opponents. And it worked. So how exactly did they pull it off? Let's break down the formula that made them nearly unbeatable. The Bad Boy Pistons weren't just tough, they were strategic. And to understand why no one could beat them, you have to break down the blueprint piece by piece. Let's start with the defense, because that was the heart of it all. Detroit didn't play defense like the rest of the NBA. While other teams relied on soft switches and drop coverage, the Pistons weaponized every inch of the court. Their goal wasn't just to stop you, it was to wear you down. Bill Laimbeer anchored the paint with a brutal edge. He wasn't athletic, he couldn't jump, but he didn't need to. Laimbeer mastered positioning. He understood angles, and most importantly, he wasn't afraid to hurt feelings or ribs. He averaged just under 10 rebounds per game across his prime years and set more moving screens than the refs could ever call. His presence alone made players second-guess their drives. Their perimeter wasn't much kinder. Joe Dumars might have been quiet, but his defense was surgical. He could guard your best scorer without trash talk, without drama, and still shut them down. Michael Jordan once called Dumars the toughest defender he ever faced. Think about that. Not Gary Payton, not Clyde Drexler, not Reggie Miller, Joe Dumars. And then you had Isiah Thomas, the floor general with a mean streak. While his scoring and playmaking got the headlines, Isiah's defense was crafty. He wasn't the strongest or fastest, but he was relentless, poking the ball loose, drawing charges, and baiting stars into frustration. He understood how to disrupt, but defense was only half the story. What truly made Detroit unbeatable was how they turned their defense into offense. The Pistons were elite at forcing bad shots, collecting rebounds, and immediately pushing the ball. Their transition game didn't look like Magic's Lakers. It looked like a swarm. Rodman or Mahorn would snatch a board, hand it to Isiah, and within 3 seconds it was either a fast break layup or a kick-out three from Laimbeer, who, by the way, was hitting over 35% from deep at 6'11", in an era where bigs never shot threes. This dual identity, grind you down on defense, punish you on offense, made every possession feel like survival. And it only got worse in the playoffs. Let's talk about their psychological warfare. Every great team has tactics. The Pistons had the Jordan rules. It wasn't just a strategy, it was a manifesto, designed specifically to beat one man, Michael Jordan. The rule was simple: hit him every single time. If he drives, knock him down. If he pulls up, crowd him. If he passes, double the return. And it worked. Before Jordan's Bulls finally broke through in '91, they lost to the Pistons 3 straight years in the playoffs, including 2 straight Eastern Conference Finals. In 1989 and 1990, Jordan averaged fewer assists, more turnovers, and visibly wore down over each series. The Pistons were inside his head. They didn't just beat the Bulls, they delayed the birth of a dynasty. And they didn't just break Jordan. They took down Larry Bird's Celtics, Magic Johnson's Lakers, and every rising star in between. In the 1989 NBA Finals, the Pistons swept the Showtime Lakers. Let that sink in. A team with Magic, Kareem, and Worthy swept, and in 1990, they repeated as champs, this time shutting down the upstart Portland Trail Blazers. The Pistons had become the first team since the Bill Russell Celtics to make 3 straight finals appearances and win back-to-back titles. But none of this was just about individual stats or rings. It was about culture. Chuck Daly didn't run a democracy. He ran a unit. Every man knew his job. Every rotation was tight. Every foul had intent. Daly famously called it organized chaos, but he also knew when to let his players loose. In the locker room, he gave them respect. On the court, he gave them freedom. That balance is why his players loved him, even while they were scaring the rest of the league. Here's the thing, though. Detroit didn't have the most talent. They didn't have the biggest budget or the best media market. What they had was an edge. They trained harder, they hit harder, they studied tape like it was scripture, they anticipated plays before they happened. They didn't win in spite of their identity, they won because of it. And yet, as dominant as they were, something was brewing, a cultural backlash. The NBA, led by David Stern, was shifting its image toward stars, highlights, and marketability. The Pistons, they were bad for business. Their physicality made headlines, but their brand didn't sell shoes. When Jordan finally got over the hump in '91, the league didn't just celebrate, it moved on. The Pistons were no longer just villains. They were a closed chapter. And here's the paradox. No one could beat the Bad Boys, but the NBA couldn't afford to let them stay on top. By 1992, the Bad Boys were broken up. Daly was gone, Isiah's body was failing, Rodman was spiraling, and the dynasty ended not with a bang, but with a silent refusal to shake hands. But maybe that's exactly what they wanted, because if there's one thing the Bad Boys Pistons taught the world, it's this. You don't have to be liked, you don't have to be marketable, you just have to win. and be willing to pay the price for it. No team since has successfully recreated their formula, not because it didn't work, but because it required a level of self-sacrifice and collective grit that's nearly impossible to sustain in today's era of brand-first basketball. And maybe that's why we still talk about them, because in a league full of legends, the Bad Boy Pistons weren't just great, they were necessary. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Pistons' ruthless dynasty, consider subscribing for more in-depth basketball breakdowns that go beyond the box score. Let us know in the comments, could any team today survive playing against the Bad Boys? And if you think this story was wild, wait till you see how the Bulls finally took them down. That's up next. Stay locked in.